Right. Our next story comes from Ars Technica, and the title here is Copilot exposes private GitHub pages, some removed by Microsoft. This was very, on the one hand, it was surprising, and on the other hand, surprising. A security company called Lasso had discovered in some investigation that Bing cache, so the search engine Bing, maintained a cache that allowed ongoing access into GitHub repositories that had been once public, later turned private, but were indexed at some point when they were public. And that cache remained available even after the repos were made private. And by the way, as they point out in this story, that's not an uncommon thing. A lot of companies struggle with this issue where either an employee's uploaded some code to a public repository that was not intended to be public, like it's proprietary source code, or the more common issue, which is mentioned here, the code turned out to contain embedded secrets, which we've talked a lot about. Like, this is a really pervasive problem that we have in the industry. Coded credentials. One of the first, like, almost every organization in their playbook, when they find something like this, the very first thing they do is turn that repository private, because it's viewed as like, okay, we're cutting off, we obviously we have to go figure out something bad happened, but we're going to at least make sure that it doesn't keep happening. We're going to stop the bleeding, and then we can go figure out how much blood we lost. But what they found here was that that you were still bleeding, you just didn't realize it through Bing cache. So Lasso contacted Microsoft, and Microsoft made some changes to Bing in their caching system so that those repositories that were once public, now private, did not appear in the cache. However, Lasso then found that Microsoft's AI agent, Copilot, has access to the now private Bing cache, and so it continues to have access to these old, once public, now private code repositories. And if you know how to ask correctly, like, and there's obviously a whole industry, spinning up around figuring out how to ask creative questions to your favorite AI engine, you can get it to provide code that was once was taken offline. And in fact, they talk about a specific example where Microsoft had gone after a code repo that allowed abuse of, ironically enough, Copilot, and basically kind of oversimplified jailbreaking Copilot. And they were able to get basically a court agree that should not be public, and they got it taken down. However, their own Copilot continues to provide access to that same code that they got taken down through the courts. And the point here is that if you ever had code that was available and you later turned public or turned from public to private in a repository, it is entirely possible that it was indexed and is available through Copilot if somebody is smart enough to know how to ask.
Or other systems.
Or others. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously talking about Copilot. I think Copilot is an interesting case because of the tight binding between Bing's search engine and crawling in cache and the agent.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a ton of issues with stuff inadvertently marked as public that should have been private, or people publishing to the wrong repo, and how quickly those get scanned and indexed by both researchers and threat actors. They're very good at finding that stuff. So my position has always been, if it's ever public, assume it's always public. And I think it even says in the article, like, you can never assume just switching it to private solves the problem. You have to rotate the secrets.
Yeah, you can't unring the bell.
Code.
Like,
No.
It doesn't matter in what, and look, I'm going to go off on a tangent, right? You put something on the internet,
it's forever.
It's forever. Like, it's never going away. And I don't care if that's, some stupid off-color joke to Facebook or committing a secret into a GitHub repo. Like, it's forever. You have to assume that it has been indexed, it's been cached, it's been screenshotted. It is there. And so you touched on it, right? In this instance, if the issue that caused you to turn the repository from public to private was the existence of keys, like, you can't rely on making it private as the solution. Like, you've got to rotate those keys. And I'll go further and say you should be rotating them anyway.
Yeah, but who does? That's like washing your underwear, man. You're supposed to, but nobody does it. No, it's an interesting problem. One problem I see over and over and over and over again is how easy it is to get confused when you're about to submit code. Is this a public or private repo? It is a very common problem across GitHub, GitLabs, whatever. It's just a massively easy to make a mistake there, and you run into problems. And to your point, 100% agreed. If it's ever exposed, you have to assume that it was indexed, it was captured. What's interesting to me is that Microsoft has taken the stance of trying to block these cached pages, which to me feels like you're playing whack-a-mole anyway. And I don't know, it feels an inelegant solve versus, hey, we index and cache things. And if you made it public, that's on you. Don't do that. And it's like you said, trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's because okay, great, you get it scrubbed from Copilot or Bing or their caching engines. There's probably others that captured it too. Now they're closer to it and faster, but they have no monopoly on that.
I'm sure Google is doing the same thing, and OpenAI is doing this. Like, almost all of the AI agents, I'm just picking on AI for a second right now, like, all of the AI agents have built their own crawling infrastructure because that's how they train their stuff. So they have huge repositories of data that they've crawled, and that stuff is sitting around, and they're not going back to see if a repository that they scanned or crawled and made a copy of is now private. Like, that's not what they do. So I do like the you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube analogy. That was very apt metaphor.
Yes. And by the way, that was in the article.
Yes.
I'm stealing it from the article just to give credit where credit is due.
Fair enough. Anyway, I will say, in prior lives, the employers have had quote internal enterprise GitHub repositories, but I've also had on github.com, and that github.com presence is not uncommon because a lot of IT companies want to show like thought leadership, and they want to provide sample code to interface with their wares or what have you. And so even if you provide the tooling that creates kind of a safe space for your employees to commit their stuff to, which, by the way, like, we can have a separate discussion about, like, is it okay to still include keys in source code that's only accessible internally? Like, that's
true.
It's not a bad. I mean, it's not a good thing either. But you still have a point of confusion because you've got developers who are, at the end of the day, people with deadlines and milestones and family stuff, and making bad decisions about where to post what. So I would say don't sit back and say, well, we like everything's in a internally controlled enterprise GitHub repo or GitLab repo, because that could create a false sense of security for you.
Yeah, agreed percent. Well said.